Hello. Good morning. It's time for another episode of the Laughing Therapist on Call AM. And that's right, it's the last day in Mental Health Awareness Month here in Canada. And it is the last day of May 2020. I'm Shirvington Hannays, the Laughing Therapist, and Mr. Right in Peace for the Soul. And we're going to continue featuring the Recovery Show. And because the last episode, I aborted it mid airing because the system suddenly froze and I knew something was clearly up. So I aborted it. And now that I look back, there's a long dead ear, if you want to say that. For television, is a blank screen and just darkness. So I'm going to be removing that and use this opportunity to revisit part 5, which is looking at the fifth enemy in recovery, in which we're looking at the 6 enemies in recovery: behavioral change maintenance and relapse prevention. We're looking at number 5, the 5th enemy, which is your tolerance level for discomfort and your coping styles or skills. Your coping skills, that's right. What's your coping skills? How do you cope with discomfort from life stresses and stressors? So we're going to revisit that, and we're going to look at some coping styles that people develop and use to combat or to counter feeling discomfort in life. So to go back, let's set the stage with what we have explored so far in terms of 1. We feel some sort of discomfort and we have to respond to bring about some level of balance or homeostasis. So we're going to react. But what are we reacting to? Well, oftentimes it's some threat to one of our boundaries, our 6 boundaries we have: emotional, psychological, physical, intellectual, spiritual. Okay? I said emotional, I said psychological, mental, intellectual, physical, spiritual. When we feel that those are threatened on some level, we would then come up with that's right, a stress response. And a stress response based on the fact that in our body, certain chemicals and hormones have been released that brings about what is referred to as stress, or preparation, or a body mechanism or defense mechanism that is there to help us protect ourselves in perceive or some sort of perception of a threat to our safety, where any of those boundaries. So sometimes it may not be your physical being or space that is threatened, but you feel that on some level in your psychological, your emotional, your spiritual, your intellectual boundaries that feels threatened. And the natural response is to respond with a stress response, which is either fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And in the beginning, without doing all the necessary research, I heard fawn, and I'm like, oh, fawn, F-O-N-D. No, F-A-W-N, fawn. And I've gone through what fawn is representative of. We've gone through the different ways in which you may respond in terms of labeling with emotions, and we know that, hey, these are ways in which you either in fawn, and we know what those are by now. Now, let's take this to another level. So how do we arrive at maladaptive ways? Over time, ways of developing certain coping skills to cope with the discomfort that we do not want to either experience, we have low tolerance for. And one of those I've looked at and I've shared that we have basically a couple of categories. We have defense mechanisms, we have attack mechanisms, we have the various types of defense mechanisms. So, for example, we have displacement, sublimation, we have displacement, sublimation, projection, rationalization, fantasies, intellectualization, denial, repression or suppression, withdrawal, reaction formation. Yes, these are all the broader categories of defense mechanisms, how we defend our boundaries and get homeostasis so that we can move beyond whatever it is that might have threatened us or in which we felt some element of discomfort. But it's one thing to defend. Oftentimes, whatever might have been the threat, real or not real or just perceived, it may not just go away, and our adjustment with it will require some element or some amount of coping. And we have various styles that have been established that we use to cope. We have, for example, we have a style of denying that's even real. And we know denial in terms of the defense mechanism of denying that something is actually happening is the simplest defense to understand. It is simply the refusal to acknowledge what has, is, or will happen. Refusal to accept that this has happened, is happening, or is going to happen. My partner, for example, didn't have an affair, but was simply traveling for work a lot. It's clear from every sign that your partner is being unfaithful. There's some element of infidelity, but to be able to cope with it and live with it and continue to be in the relationship, you would justify to say, you know what? It's because of work. Now, my partner would not cheat on me. When all the evidence is suggesting that that is the case. So you use denial, a refusal to accept. We oftentimes may mix it up to say, well, it's not lying to oneself. Well, not necessarily. Refusing to accept something is a totally different thing as against lying. Now, lying, misrepresenting facts to another with malicious intent to cause either distortion or clearly misrepresent facts. That is a whole different ballgame as against a refusal to accept what is the truth. You're not telling somebody that. You are using it as a means of how you're going to say, but if I see it through this light, I'm better able to handle the situation when they show up and I now have to either make love with them or prepare their dinner or partake in some activity with them to show that we have a united front as a family. Denial. So I'm having an interesting time here because I'm looking for the coping skills. So I get a comprehensive list to share with you. I have half of the list, but I don't want to just present half of the list. I know I've gone through several of the more common ones, and we've broken down into broader categories, the different types in terms of defense, in terms of attack. And let's see here. So we have defense, we have attack, we have one second. This has been my day of dealing with but I need something. I can't find it. But we're gonna go ahead because we're alive. And the thing that I have tons and tons of copies of this is not funny. But you know, that is life. and I'm live and I'm trying my best to just not necessarily wing it, but go through some element of being in control, for example, of the situation. My stress response right now is not to panic. But of course, let's take a natural segue. What's your tolerance level for discomfort? Well, right now, this is very discomforting. But you notice, I'm trying my best not to panic, not to see it as a setback, but to adapt, because that's your mental health. I can choose to think of this so many ways. Okay, I can choose to feel that, okay, I'm not doing something right. Or as against, how can I stay true to the topic at hand, adapt adaptively, what the World Health Organization says is your mental health in this Mental Health Awareness Month here in Canada, the last day of it, that is. Well, the idea that you must be miserable when you have pressures and difficult experiences that you have little ability to control and cannot change your disturbed feeling is inaccurate. You don't have to feel miserable because things are not going well. Like right now, I'm like, you know what? This is life. Things happen. Best laid plan, prepared, got up since about 1:30 and preparing myself to come and do this. Because the first thing that happened is that I had to change the system totally around, because last night when I got ready to do the laughing therapist on call prime time, the keyboard would not respond to any input from me. And after about a half an hour of trying to get it to work, changing several keyboards, I just gave up. And I said, you know what? I'll do it tomorrow. There was a time when I would have been bent out of shape and be constantly worrying with what people will be thinking. I'm not on and all of that. Yeah, it would be good to be impeccable with your word. Meaning you do what you say you're going to do, mean what you say you're going to do, and you do it. But there are times when it may be totally out of your control. Bending yourself out of shape and becoming miserable when you have pressures or difficult experiences and that you had little control. No, I made a phone call, then I had something to eat, and then I went to bed. Well, I shouldn't say that loud. But yeah, the times I'm so tired, I have a late dinner and I go to bed, and it's being reflected here. But it's my intention to change all that. Moving along. One way to tackle a problem is to have an understanding of what some barriers are. They are practical emotional disturbance, and be mindful to realize emotional disturbance are part of every one of us. All of us. Like I said, come on, death at one point in my life would have been a mess of a whatever. However, I pivoted and I'm keeping in vein of the topic. I know what's the topic. I have a general idea what to talk about, to ad-lib or to improvise. We're talking about what's your level for discomfort. And hello, am I having an experience right now where there was elements of discomfort when realizing that I put the stuff, but in packing some stuff up, finally I packed it away very nicely. And I kid you not, as soon as I'm done the show, I'm sure I will turn something over and voila, there it will be. But because I want to stay true, and this is the second time coming at this episode, talk about your level of tolerance for discomfort. What's my level of tolerance? I've come to know that oftentimes it's not what happened that creates the discomfort. It's my thought about what has happened. Well, this shouldn't happen. Well, it's happened. It's irrational to be insisting it shouldn't happen when it's happened. Duh, it's happened. So right now, what's my stress response? Go with the flow. Am I knowledgeable about discomfort with how we cope with it? Well, I'm coping with it very fine right now. And you know what? Since this is the only thing that is available, half of it, I'm going to read some examples of coping styles or skills that we develop over time, because you might have repeatedly use them. So, for example, we may ask for help or complain, ask for help and then reject it. If a coping style, some people ask for help, and then when the help shows up and is not in alignment with what they think the help should look like, they reject it. We may idealization, playing up the good points and ignoring limitations of things desired. Identification, copying others to take on their characteristics. Intellectualizing. Oftentimes, a lot of people intellectualize. And intellectualizing is taking the emotion out of a situation and just talking about it in very lofty intellectual terms. So intellectually avoiding the emotion by focusing on facts and logics. Okay? As soon as you start telling me all the facts and all the logics about the thing, and for example, what the research says, you're intellectualizing. How would you deal with right now? I'm a little confused, or right now I'm a little tense, or right now that's keeping with what's happening in the present moment in the now. Introjection, bringing things from the outer world into the inner world. Passive aggression, avoiding refusal by passive avoidance. Ooh, I love the way this is put forward. This is the first time I'm actually seeing passive aggression being explained this way. Avoiding refusal. You don't want to deal with the refusal of the thing, so you use passive avoidance because you don't want to deal with the full-on rejection, perhaps. Then, of course, performance ritual, patterns that delay. Get into certain things that delay the potential doing, engaging. Yes, it's a form of procrastination, but you are, I love this, performing rituals, patterns that delay. So you go through a series of things that you do repeatedly over and over, whenever it's time to deal with a particular thing. So how about rationalization? Lots of clients, but you have to work through and work with them is rationalization. Creating logical reasons for bad behavior. A coping skill that some people develop, create logical reasons for bad behavior. Reaction formation, avoiding something by taking a polar opposite position. Avoiding something by taking a polar opposite position. That's reaction formation. Regression, returning to a childlike state to avoid problems. Returning to a childlike state. Returning to a childlike state. I'm reflecting on this because I just realized, okay, I'll address it. What about repression? So there's regression and there's repression. Subconsciously hiding uncomfortable thoughts. Subconsciously hiding uncomfortable thoughts. Repression. As against regression, going back to, this is more in terms of, yes, a way of thinking and a way of behaving. That is regression. The thoughts, suppression, is subconsciously hiding uncomfortable thoughts. Self-harm, that's a coping skill or style that some people employ to deal with discomforting feelings, or when their level of discomfort is very low. So they use these things. Somatization, psychological problems turning into physical symptoms. With persons with psychological problems, before you know it, it is being expressed physiologically in their body, which oftentimes can lead to elements or some degree of hypochondria. A person has all the symptoms for something where there's no logical explanation or reason why they should be having those symptoms, but they have them and they're real. Okay, in terms of physical expression, which comes in like it says here. Somatization based on having psychological problems that is being manifest physically. Then, of course, substitution, replacing one thing with another suppression, consciously holding back on one urge. So there is suppression, there is repression, there is regression. Three different things. And then, of course, there are other types of coping. There are positive coping that can be done well. There is double think, Orwell's holding of contradictory beliefs, preparation and confrontation, and confirmation, preparation and confirmation, struck out in preparing to act, mask, face wear on the outside, mask, where you put on a face that doesn't or isn't reflective of how you're feeling inward. So you have certain masks that you wear. And then, of course, popular one, excuses, 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 excuses. We make excuses for just about everything. A form of rationalizing, but it's an outright excuse. Many ways of justifying or avoiding when you make excuses. And finally, tend and befriend. Tend and befriend. I like this, tend and befriend, which isn't necessarily found as in FAWN, but it is female alternative to fight or flight. Female alternative, fight or flight. The way females will act, oftentimes they'll befriend a thing, a situation, or a person to get the upper hand or to be able to better cope with it, manage it, get beyond it. So in looking at that, why don't we take a segue to look at emotional flooding? Emotional flooding, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response, when oftentimes we have to respond to something and we choose to be so, and it's a choice, to be a subliminal or a very simple choice, but there's a choice there where we choose to be more caught up with emotion, and before you know it, we are flooded by the emotion. So flooding happens when we lose the ability to access the logical and the thinking part of our brain when we are overwhelmed with emotion. At that point, practicing self-compassion, holding space, and showing empathy can become extremely difficult. What is emotional flooding? So, what is emotional flooding to you? When you're coping with a situation, how do you cope with it? When you are feeling overwhelmed by your emotion, do you just give in? Do you surrender? Do you become aggressive? Do you attack? How do you deal with emotional flooding when you're not able to access the logical and thinking part of your brain, but everything now is emotional? How do you do that? Maybe for today, you want to make a special effort to see how do you act and react with your emotions when they are overwhelming and you're not able to logically think through the process. I like to say with this that oftentimes with emotional flooding, what happens is that people then see that life is happening to them as against through them. Life is happening to them as against through them. And through them is where you're an active participant in making choices objectively, or sometimes you make it based on the information that you have available to you. But life is happening through you as against to you. Are you sitting in the passenger seat of your life, or you're in the driver's seat, taking full control of your life unfolding and being unfolded through you, not to you? Oftentimes, people with a victim mentality constantly have life or the concept or the perception that life is happening to them. They're a victim to life, as against being a hero in your life, being the driver in the driver's seat in your life, where life is happening through you. So, stress is a widely used construct to mean various feelings by various people. Notwithstanding the divergence of emotion embodying this construct, it all comes down to change in individuals' emotional and psychological state. We are more likely to experience hurtful symptoms of stress if we perceive an event to have potential to adverse outcomes in our lives and that we don't have what is required to surmount it. When we say we're stressed out, yes, we have explored and looked at that is the body's natural protective phenomena where certain hormones are released, adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine that comes in to help us to engage in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. The optimal level of arousal when a person is able to function the most effectively is understood according to the window of tolerance theory. Window of tolerance theory in our coping mechanism to life and with life stresses and stressors, there's a window of tolerance. We all can tolerate certain things up to a certain point based on our supportive system, our own resilience, our own mindset, and our potential, and based on our level to deal with discomfort. What is our level of tolerance? So the window of tolerance here looks at this theory was coined by Dan Segal. When an individual is functioning in the individual window of tolerance, navigating everyday life has somewhat of an ease to it. So when you're not quote unquote stressed out, or you're able to adaptively respond to what's coming through you and coming based on impacting you from different levels, and you respond with a stress response that is appropriate to the degree of what is needed to get beyond the current either obstacle, the experience, the opportunity to grow and learn, the appropriate stress response. Is it fight? Is it flight? Is it freeze? Is it fun? It's appropriate. So, the window of opportunity where you're navigating everyday life has something of an ease to it and low difficulty level. When you're functioning in your window of tolerance, you can effectively receive, engage with, and respond to stimuli in a well thought out manner. Your arousal is impacted by the level of stress that your central nervous system is under. You're responding adaptively and appropriately. You're not overly arrogant, you're not angry, disproportionate to what is required. You're not taking a bulldozer or a Mack truck to kill an ant. You got it. You take a little thing if it needs getting onto me, you either push it away or you do a little stuff in you. And I should say to crash it. But to get a big truck to kill an ant, whoa, you're way out of control in terms of your emotional regulation and response in your stress response to the stressor. Yes, you may not sing for ants. I don't like to see ants and all of that is in my skin. And so, yes, I may have a little fear or discomfort with it, but I don't go and get a truck to come and run onto the ant to get rid of it. I remove myself out of the situation and quickly get them, or yes, crack them. So, hyperarousal, fight, outburst, I'm unsafe. So we engage in fight, but that is where you're hyper arousal. Then we have escalation, vigilance. I feel threatened. You're vigilant, so you're there on alert. Window of tolerance, I'm calm enough to learn. I'm calm enough to deal with it. Your window of tolerance. And then, of course, hypo-arousal, flight. I'm flustered and I'm going to try to avoid it, so I'm going to try to escape it. And then, of course, disassociation on a scale put forward by Arm and Krishnamurthy, 2020, puts forward the window of tolerance moving from hyperarousal, where you engage, you fight, you have escalation, where you are vigilant, okay, ready to respond in an adaptive and appropriate way, or you in that sweet spot, the window of tolerance, you can tolerate it. You're calm, you're being able to respond with it. I mean, look at it. The way they started, but I couldn't find the coping styles. What did I do? Did I get flustered? Did I just say, well, we have to end the show? I tried to bring about some balance. My stress response was like, I can do this. My window of tolerance was appropriate to the stuff. I can either improvise. I looked at other ways in which I can address the issues that dealt with the topic of the episode. And here we are at 30 minutes in, and I get to say namaste to you. Thank you for joining me as we look at the number 5, your level of tolerance for discomfort and your coping skills to deal with life's stresses and stressors. I'm Shirvington Hannays, and this was the Laughing Therapist on Call AM. Until next time, you can always get more information at www.smallhomechange.clinic or www.changeclinic.org. Bye for now.